Our final guest this evening hails from the den of the Southern Rebellion, Charleston, South Carolina. Influenced by the duality that exists there, he made some interesting decisions, starting with attending the college, founded after a slave revolt, which also had the dubious distinction of producing the two cadets who fired the first shots of the Civil War. An English major as an undergrad, he decided to join the Marine Corps and spent almost a decade there, earning his MA in English literature in the process. He loves telling stories, especially stories about those seminal moments that explain the duality that exists in most people. Welcome back to Tuesday Funk, Norman Doucet.
How's everyone doing? Good. First, I'd like to thank my dear friends Andrew and Eden for having me back. I don't know why, but they had me back. I really appreciate it. Also, to everyone else that read this evening, you guys are all great, and it's just a real honor to be in the presence of such great minds and great writing minds as well. Lastly, before I begin, I know we've talked about Kyle and Eden's upcoming wedding. I'd also like to mention that my friend Andrew and his better half just celebrated their 10-year anniversary, so congratulations. And my rock is also here, my wife Rachel, so thanks, honey. I love to listen to and tell stories. Stories are, to me, one of the best ways to connect with people, because in the conveyance of a story, a person's true personality has a way of coming through, as well as their proclivities, insecurities, fears, and delights. Storytelling is truly a sharing of a person's self with others. The last couple of times I read, I told stories about my time in the Marine Corps, in a time of war, and how I am a recovering bigot. I think those two stories are a natural segue into what I'm going to talk about tonight. I don't think of this as a story per se. It is more of an opinionated set of observations. I will caveat this by saying this is not a political piece. If you violently agree or are pissed off by something I'm about to say, that's on you. The only agenda I have here is to share some of my insights based on my experience. A person who has traveled the world, maybe as much as some of you, but also in a completely different way. I've been to 6 continents and 51 countries, and even some places that are not considered countries like Palestine. In all of this travel, I've only been on an actual vacation a handful of times. Most of this trekking was done because some government or group of people was trying to suppress another government or group of people, and we were sent in to do the oppressing in the opinion of some, or to stop the oppression in the opinion of others. Needless to say, I generally saw the worst human behavior and lived according to our standards here in some of the worst conditions. And sometimes people even shot at us in anger. And I say that because there's a big difference of just shooting at someone when you're not mad at them and shooting at someone when you are mad at them. And seriously, there's a difference. I know it's crazy. I also didn't do a lot of building of things, as is sometimes advertised by those advocating regime change, but I did do a ton of blowing shit up. Why am I sharing all of this? Well, yesterday was the 72nd anniversary of the Normandy invasion, or D-Day. As a former military guy, I took a moment to reflect on the last good war. To be clear though, wars are not generally good for the folks fighting them, or for the civilians caught in the middle. They are good, in my opinion, for the folks making money and gaining power as a result of them, and I suspect that those are the folks that helped coin the phrase good war, great war, etc. But I digress, I apologize. I was reflecting on what our country was fighting for during World War II, and I asked myself the question, what has changed in the last 72 years? But then I asked the question, what is the same as it was 72 years ago? I think that is the most revealing question, because I think some of the symptoms may have cleared up, but the viruses are still very much alive, present and continuing to infect us all. We could all probably name several things, and I'm sure some of you are thinking of some of those things right now. A quick aside, as I was writing this, I put this particular project aside several times. I wrung my hands and cursed myself because there was so much that I thought was the same from 72 years ago. How was I going to address them all? We are still a bigoted society. Excuse me. We are still a misogynistic society. We're still apathetic outside of our own echo chambers. When motivated, we are still capable of great deeds or great horrors. So I started to think a little more, to run through the Rolodex in my head of my human interactions in all those places, with warlords and extremists, with patriots and with fundamentalists, with my own folks, my own Marines and sailors, and with those souls just trying to make it through each day so they can feed and care for their families. And then I thought some more. And I became frustrated and dejected, and I drank. Then last night, I came home, caught the attention of my little girl, and she did what she often does. Look at me, recognize me, and smile the biggest smile in the world. And then it hit me. The thing that is the same, but has gotten worse in my opinion, is our ability to connect, to truly connect on a spiritual level with other human beings has been hijacked. It's been hijacked, in my opinion, excuse me, by governments, the powerful and influential. It's been stripped down by things like religion, race, family, education, gender and profession and social grouping, and has been trampled by technology, sports, gambling, porn, and other forms of entertainment. We have become a collection of cells, interested mainly in the success and proliferation of our cells at the expense of other cells if need be, but who really gives a shit about the other cells anyway? As I said before, I spent some time in Palestine. I was sent there to study urban raid tactics, no shit, and techniques. In order to do that, of course, I had to observe some actual raids, which I did. On one such raid, I happened to enter a dwelling. It was just that. It was basically a hut, a brick hut, in which there were some women and children amongst some of the men that the Israelis were looking for. In the middle of all the chaos of knocking down doors and armed soldiers entering a room or a house in the middle of the night, the flashbangs, the yelling, the screaming, the grabbing, the pushing, the shoving of the soldiers with their weapons pointed at everyone, the children were visibly not shaken. They were actually indignant to the soldiers and somewhat aggressive with them. At the time I thought, wow, I cannot imagine how tough it must be for the Israeli soldiers to show restraint and not just knock the kids out or shoot them. Looking back on it now, the real sadness was that the children, and there were like 4 of them, no more than 8 or 9, had already lost their ability to connect with other human beings. They were already hardened, making them ideal candidates to join the cause, whatever cause that would have been or is. After the raid was over, I had the opportunity to debrief the soldiers who participated in the raid. I asked them about the children. They shrugged and said basically, it is what it is. These children are lost. They are enemies that will have to be dealt with at a later time. Again, at that moment, I nodded in agreement. Looking back on the situation and thinking about that particular region in a broader context, perhaps everyone there, Palestinian and Israeli, is lost. So I'm going to bring this a little bit closer to home. I'm like my father-in-law, I just cry. It's crazy. I have a friend who lives on the south side. I've known this friend for over a decade, and he and I have been through some trials and tribulations together. We met in the Marine Corps. He is more like a brother than a friend in essence. I was with him when he met his wife, and he was there when I met my wife. Actually, he was on the phone because I ran into the restroom and called him and said, dude, I met this amazing woman. I have no idea what to say to her. Help me. I was at the funeral of one of his sons who died in a tragic accident. He was at my wedding, and he was getting mistaken for me at the reception. Kind of look alike. Not to mention, we were together for, thank you, Cinnamon. We were together for a whole host of stories that I simply cannot or will not share because my wife is in the room, my friends are in the room, and we really shouldn't talk about that stuff. He is a White Sox fan and I'm a Cubs fan, and we make the North Side, South Side jokes. But there is a narrative beneath the surface of those jokes. There's a feeling that each of us has beneath those jokes. The narrative is one, in my opinion, of a divided and broken city. The feelings are xenophobia, anger, envy, and fear. In those two sports teams, our city is represented both the good and the bad. The good when each is watching their team win the Worlds. I cannot believe I said that, excuse me. When we are watching our teams win baseball games. And the bad when they play each other and you actually go to the game and listen to the comments the Cubs fans make about the Sox fans and vice versa. In public, excuse me, or under their breaths, or the way the fans look at each other. Am I overstating this? Perhaps. But those simmering feelings I describe are there for me and someone that I call a brother. I'm going to take another turn here into the realm of politics, although this is still not a political thing. I'm just sharing a story. This is a story about my best friend Joe, whom a few of you know. And to be honest, Joe is kind of an asshole. He's loud, aggressive, bullheaded, a little bit of a know-it-all, and enjoys being a contrarian. And honey, I swear this story's about Joe, not me. About 2 months ago, I got a text from Joe at 1 a.m. saying that he had just been physically attacked. Now, this is really not news in and of itself. I've gotten texts similar to those in the past. The difference is that when I asked him by whom, his response was a bit surprising. He responded by friends at a party in my backyard. So I asked why, and his response was, I gave a supporting argument for Donald Trump. When I got a chance to actually talk to him a few days later, he explained that as the night wore on, the subject had turned to politics and, well, Trump bashing, in his words. And so he had to say something. Joe, like me, is a complex guy, molded by his time spent fighting in Iraq and seeing the horrors of house to house, street by street, close combat in Fallujah and other places. He's molded by his love for what he and I call the experiment of the United States. And it's one guiding principle, that all people, damn it.
You want me to snort?
Please. I rehearsed this, I didn't cry, I promise. Let me back up a little bit. He is molded for his love for what we call the experiment of the United States, and it's one guiding principle, that all people are equally valuable. He's a little bit of a weird idealist, like me. So he tired of the Trump bashing and offered some cogent and erudite observations to the group. At which point, in his words, they turned on him. In his defense, he did admit that his actual delivery could have been better, i.e. not condescending, or filled with a few strategically placed expletives. However, in his words, he was shouted down, surrounded, pushed and shoved, and actually got some deep scratches on his arms and a little bit of a bruise on his face. The funny thing was that the group of friends that did this included a couple of professors at Ohio State University, an engineer, and some other educated professional folks. Now, I am not here making an argument for Donald Trump. His constant buffoonery and jackassery make that virtually impossible for me to do. However, the larger point of this is that there are groups of us that violently oppose other groups of us during one of the most sacred events of our experiment. We pride ourselves as Americans on the peaceful transition of power and on the transparency and peacefulness of our election process. But it seems to me like we could have used, and maybe should be using, some of those UN observers that we like to push on other less civilized nations. Why am I talking about this? Because we have become so divided by political ideologies, party loyalties, and special interests that we have produced some of the most head-scratching candidates, and for that matter, presidents in recent history. And even when we get it right, the other side is so vehemently opposed to that person that disagreements aren't even about politics. We soil our collective selves by shouting liar at the president in the halls of Congress. I don't know what I'm doing. This is crazy. Our halls, they're our halls of Congress. Or we give ridiculous claims like, was he really born here? We give those claims wings and legs. Or we say stupid shit like, you're either with us or you're against us. To me, we dishonor ourselves by not giving each other the opportunity to speak our minds intelligently and disagree with them intelligently. I know for one, I'm very guilty of this. Damn, I'm not that guilty. I'm not so guilty. Not like that. From the examples I just gave, to the crazy dislike and in some instances hatred of Aborigines I witnessed in Australia, to the superior, dismissive, and contemptuous attitudes of mainland Japanese folks towards Okinawans that I witnessed, to tribal hatred that I witnessed in Afghanistan and other places, to the hatred of everyday Muslim Filipinos caught in the middle of a war against their government and actual extremists, to my own bigotry, I'm very concerned. Perhaps each of us, caught up in our own selves, self-interests, desires, fears, and agendas, have lost the ability to look at someone, recognize ourselves in them, and connect with them. When I look at my children and the children who are around me, I see the hijacking, stripping, and trampling of their natural state beginning. My 3-year-old doesn't recognize our concept of race yet. She doesn't feel different because she's female. She doesn't know that my grandmother thinks she has good hair. My 9-month-old pretty much smiles at everyone and everything. She can't begin to understand the concept of stranger danger or family or like this person is good and that person's bad. She exists in a perfect, fragile, and short-lived construct. Personally, I wish I could just have 5 minutes of her world every day. The closest that I get to that is when she looks at me, recognizes me, and smiles the biggest smile in the world. Thank you, everyone.